Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on this worm bin, which is now 119 days of age, 17 weeks that is. And their last feeding 2 weeks ago was their 10th feeding. And they got stuff that I assume is probably not going to show up as leftovers. There were things like cucumber peels and other yummy, delicious foods. And we delivered the food to them in a way that I normally don't bother to do. I've done it in the past, but it had been a while since I'd taken each little handful of material of different kitchen scraps and wrapped them each into a nice bundle, a little newspaper bundle. So I had 6 chunks of newspaper, each into which we dropped some delicious foods. So I wondered if, in pursuit of those delicious foods, if we would perhaps not even find any leftovers of that newspaper that the food was bundled into. Now I see flying insects. There's quite a number of them around here. And the Mosquito Dunks has been doing a fine job helping to control the flying insects and my wormery for the most part. But this seems to be a place where the stuff just hasn't been applied in adequate amounts yet, so perhaps the trick to today's check-in is to be super generous with the Mosquito Dunks, and perhaps we'll start seeing some improvement over here too. So let's check out how the feeding zone came along over the past 2 weeks. Oh boy, it's pretty muddy. I think it'll be beneficial for the system to have all these leaves that are out here on the surface blended in. Kind of help this muddy-ish material be a little bit more loose by having some different bedding type materials blended into it. And then I've got more leaves too. I've got my box of leaves on the ready, so I thought we could maybe, rather than using newspaper to accompany today's meal as the bedding of choice, we would just give them leaves. More leaves out here on the surface after we've blended all these that are already in here into the bed. And then also accompany today's feeding with the stuff. So yeah, definitely chunks of leftover newspaper here and there. There were certain spots where the stuff was sort of crumbled together. I didn't take a great deal of care to spread this stuff out to give the material easy access from all directions. But as long as some of these larger chunks are right out here on the surface, I figured let's try to help spread these out a little bit. Perhaps even tear them into multiple pieces. And then in short order, we'll probably see no signs of that paper anymore. So I think that was a bedding that the worms liked. And it seems like the food that they got last time was stuff they liked as well. There was a pretty good size recess in the middle where the feeding had been. So not only did they eat all the food, it does seem like they consumed a good bit of the bedding that was surrounding the food too. And yeah, there is a good bit of moisture in here. I'm not worried about it though. I'm, number one, going to be coming in with more dry material here. Dry leaves. And that's quite a bit. Pretty generous portion getting laid in as the foundation for today's juicy meal. Today's juicy meal is going to include strawberry, watermelon rind, a couple things that didn't even get frozen. This is just the core of a pepper, as well as a couple cherry tomatoes. And I've also got some other paper-based bedding here. Not too much of it, but a used paper towel plus a used napkin. So onto this can come the delicious meal we got for these little guys. And I'm thinking that the leaves that we just tossed in were quite a bit, so maybe we don't need to add any more bedding. So it does seem like we've got a pretty generous amount of bedding in here already. I just figured we would try to spread the foods out in various ways. But I mean, if you look at the stuff that they're getting here, these things aren't going to last. I've got a feeling by the time we come in here again next time, there's going to be very little, if any, of this food remaining. I'm going to sprinkle some crushed eggshell on here. It'll serve as grit so the worms can more easily digest the food, or presumably it'll help digest their food. You know, so little coffee left here in this carton. Why don't we just give the last of it to the worms as well? More dry, kind of dry stuff. Coffee just been sitting around drying, dry leaves. But you know, considering the amount of moisture in this system, I think I'm still thinking we're going to be a-okay. So why don't we start blending in all these leaves that we shoved aside, or somewhere over here in this pile. But I figured if we kind of do a quick stirring up of all the material over here, all those leaves will eventually make their way into the bed, perhaps aiding the material in remaining kind of more loose and less muddy and less likely to start clumping together. I mean, at 119 days of age, the system is definitely still young enough that high degrees of moisture make a whole lot of sense, since we do have a pretty high concentration of bedding materials in here still relative to the number of castings that have been created here. And I see some leftovers of cucumber. I even see the seeds of some cucumber here. These actually appear like leftovers of the last meal, which is a little bit surprising. But I did wonder if there might have been little pockets of food where perhaps just a little bit too much newspaper had been wrapped around the food, obscuring it from the worms being able to get in there. Man, every now and then I just go through my systems where the worms are generally pretty skinny, but every now and then it's so cool to see a couple worms that are kind of taking advantage of the high degrees of moisture and plentiful food and chubbying themselves up. Presumably a chubby worm is one that's going to go ahead and eat even more, so I don't know. I don't think it really matters with our composting worms. What they make up for when they're not chubby is just sheer numbers of them. And I think that's sort of built in. They kind of withhold growth at the individual level somehow when they sense that there's lots of worms around, but then they also at the same time try to take full advantage of the available space by multiplying and propagating their numbers. But I guess the other interesting thing is that they can also sense when they've reached sort of the limit, you know, the carrying capacity of whatever container or constrained space that they're in, and they'll actually control their population, preventing overpopulation, which is really interesting. So let's bring in some more of my leaves here. I'll just put a little pile of it out here in the middle. I didn't use it all. There's still a little bit there in the box, just in case I need some for something else elsewhere. But then again, it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to just shoot outside and reload the box. I've got plenty of it out there. But I don't know. We'll spread it out. Perhaps if we think we need more, we could always empty the box. We don't have to be hoarders, right? Let's see how much we got. Oh, not even worth hoarding, right? Let's get rid of it. Now I've got a reason to take the box upstairs and refill it. All right, now we've got just enough to spread it out evenly across the entire top surface, giving this place a really nice homey feel. Or at least that's just the feeling I get when I see a whole bunch of leaves spread out in my worm bins. So it seemed like I'd gotten the glove pretty clean, but not perfectly clean. The rest will come off at the sink. But I do believe we returned the majority of it back into the system, which is really where the stuff belongs. And all we've got left to do is get covered up. Here too I could see flying insects all over this plastic. And I can only hope that that BTI, that Mosquito Dunks that we sprinkled in pretty generously there in the beginning, will be able to do its job. I mean, it's been working well everywhere else, so no reason to think it's going to fail to do the same here, but many more flying insects in here than I'm used to seeing, so keeping my fingers crossed for many fewer bugs next time. Alright everyone, that's it for the check-in. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.